Hello everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. So team, welcome back to the session on Eagle Eye on Cloud Security for Leadership. Today is the last day of the session. Okay. So we have to discuss about a few more things. Okay. From the continuation of things what we have discussed. So in the previous sessions, we have discussed about many key points on this particular areas. And today we'll discuss about the first of all, we'll talk about the word called as a business continuity in the cloud platform. What is the benefit of going for a cloud for business continuity? And then we'll talk about the identity and access management cloud computing. Then we'll talk about the cloud application security and the top threats in cloud computing. That's a plan for today. So in the last session, team, we have discussed about the cloud governance concepts. We have discussed about choosing a multi-cloud, the various cloud service and deployment models. We have discussed about the compliance inheritance. What is a compliance inheritance? The cloud service providers, global infrastructure. What are the reasons why we have to go to cloud computing? Why not go to a cloud platform? And a lot of things we have discussed. And what are the preparations we have to keep in mind when choosing a cloud service provider? So team, today we'll discuss about the concept of business continuity in the cloud platform. Okay. So when you go to a cloud platform, okay, whenever we talk about a cloud platform, the first most important point we have to keep in mind is about, or one of the major point is what we call as a business continuity and disaster recovery. Okay. So what is the key points, team? And talking about the word called as a business continuity and disaster recovery, what are the key points we have to keep in mind? So business continuity is an ability of a business to continue operating even in case of a disaster, right? So I want to make sure that whatever happens, I can make sure that I can continue my business operations is what we call as a business continuity. And the ability to recover from the failure is what we call as a disaster recovery, right? So normally in every organization, this is a major thing, because what happens, team, now when you go to a company, when you go to any organization, you have what you have a business functionalities. And what happens, we have to make sure that whatever we do, the business must be able to continue operating, right? We must not, we cannot say that we cannot tell our customers that, okay, because of some reason that we have to stop the services, or because of some reason we are not able to provide the services, that won't work, right? We have to make sure that whenever you go to a cloud platform, we have to make sure that, or either if you go to cloud or on premises, want to make sure that we must have a proper business continuity and disaster recovery planning, right, to ensure that our business can continue operating without any issue, right? And it's a documentation of what is a business continuity management team. It means that it's a documentation of a predefined approach or predefined structured approach on how a business will basically face, or business can continue operating even in case of a disaster. And I'm not going to talk about this business continuity process team, because when you go to a company, this is a predefined scenario there. I'm trying to talk about specifically about how this can be utilized in the cloud platform, or what is the benefit of going for this in the cloud platform is what we're going to discuss. So first of all, team, uh, when talking about business continuity in the on-premises, okay, there are many factors, right? So we will have a lot of challenges, like we want to ensure that there is a proper plan for all these things. We must first of all do something called as a risk assessment, business impact analysis, and identify the key risk in those areas which we have to identify. Then we have to plan for a proper strategy for resiliency, and we must make sure we must be able to continue operating. What is the major benefit we get when you go to a cloud platform, team? When talking about business continuity in the cloud platform, what is a major benefit we get? The major benefit we are getting when you go to a cloud platform is that you are getting a resilient infra by default. When you go to a cloud platform, the cloud service provider is having a massive infrastructure, which we call as a regions, which we call as availability zones and all. We have a massive infrastructure given by the cloud service provider, and they are, it's accessible to almost every customers and in whatever ways they want, right? So because of that reason, when going for the cloud platform, business continuity can be much more easier. But there are some certain areas which we have to keep in mind. Like the same way, let me give you a simple example now. So if I'm giving you a simple example, see, this is a comparison chart. Okay, this is a comparison chart for storage provided by Amazon called as Amazon S3. Okay, if you go to this, you can see that there is a performance chart. See this, team, here they are giving you something called as a three kind of storage. They are giving you something called as S3 standard. They are giving you something called as a S3 infrequent access, and they are giving you something called as a one zone infrequent access. And you can see that for each of these storage you are seeing here, you have a specific amount of availability you're having. What is the rule we have to always keep in mind, team? When you basically say that something is best, it's only able, we can say something is the best only if it's able to meet our business requirements, right? So let's suppose that now when you're selecting the storage or a particular service as well, we have to understand all the critical factors which can affect our business, like the RTO, the RPO, WRT, MTD, work recovery time, RSL. We have a lot of factors like this, right? So we have to clearly understand how much downtime we can tolerate, how much unavailability we can accept. Like this, we have to understand all our business aspects before going to the cloud platform. So team, when you say that, okay, now the cloud service provider is offering the maximum availability in this storage, so do we have to go for this every time, or this is the one which is best for every other requirements? No, because it can increase the cost as well, right? So we have to understand that whenever talking about the business content in the cloud platform, it can be something which you must be very careful about, or you must be very having a proper and clear planning for the same. Okay, that's the first point to keep in mind. The second thing is that when you say that you're going to a cloud platform, normally in the on-premises, what is the benefit? What is the thing you're having? You have to manage everything. But if you go to the cloud platform, there are many benefits you get. To give you an example of the benefits, first of all, in the cloud platform, the resources are abundant, right? In the on-premises, you're always having limited infrastructure for planning the BCDR as well. But if you go to the cloud platform, you have a very massive infrastructure, which is by default given by the cloud service provider. And as the cloud service provider is giving you a massive infrastructure, what is the benefit you get, team? And because of that reason, if you select the proper services and plan the BCPDR accordingly, it can help us in a proper, because we will not run out of infrastructure, right, when you go to the cloud platform. And the next major benefit of going for BCPDR in the cloud is that, team, in the on premises, when if you want to plan for a BCPDR, you have to have a massive capital expenditure. Like for example, team, what is a major problem we are having if I'm having only one data center there? Let's suppose in my on premises, I'm having only one data center. Right. If I don't have a backup data center, or if I don't have some alternate facilities, if due to some reason, if this facility goes down, or some power failure, connectivity issue, or something happens, at the end of the day, what happens? It can disrupt our business operations, right? So we have to invest a massive amount of money and a regular expense on the same. But if you go to the cloud platform, you don't have any capital expenditure for the thing, right? And you can make sure that you can basically have a running cost, or we can say an operational expenditure, when you go for the cloud platform. And the third one is the most important benefit, which I feel as always the cloud is best, because now when you go to any kind of a BCDR scenario, you can see that there is a lot of words, like we have a RTO, recovery time objective, recovery point objective, then we have a work recovery time, we have a maximum tolerable downtime. Like this, we have many values there, right? We'll discuss that in a different scenario, but any which ways, team, we have a lot of terms like this, right? So this must be precise according to your business requirements. If you go to the on premises, managing this proper time for for resolving the issues and basically bringing things back to normal, or making sure that you're able to continue your business, is a bit challenging, because now you are having a on-premises data center, and if you want to keep all this proper RTO or RPO or WRT or MTD and all these things, you have to have a lot of effort for the same. I'll give an example, team. I'll give an example. Now let's suppose that, let's take an example for a RPO. What is an RPO? Recovery point objective, right? Recovery point objective. So basically it's talking about how much data your business is willing to lose, or business can afford to lose, is what we call as a recovery point objective. That means what? Like for example, now let's suppose that our RPO is 2 hours. That means what? When our RPO is set to be 2 hours, it means that we have to take the backup every 2 hours, right? So now I took a backup at 9 a.m. What is the next backup? It will be at 11 a.m. What is the next backup? It is at 1 p.m. What is the next backup? It is at 3 p.m. So team, just in case if there is a disaster happens before the next backup, what is the only last backup we can restore? We can restore the last backup, which is at 1 p.m. That means from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. this data is lost, right? So that is basically the RPO we are mentioning. If you go to the on premises, for maintaining a lesser RPO, you have to have a lot of storage infrastructure, you have to again plan for security, you have to make sure that you have a proper automation running there. You have a lot of constraints. If you go to the cloud platform, this also can be very much easier. So in any factors when talking about BCPDR, it's very efficient when you go to the cloud platform, as you don't have to maintain or manage the hardware, and it's more, it's more quicker and faster because they have a massive infrastructure there. And the next thing is that no depreciation of resources. That means what? Let's suppose that when you basically have a hardware in your on premises, okay, let's suppose that you are having a servers or some storage devices there. So can you use your storage device for the lifetime team? Like for example, now I am purchasing a storage SAN cluster for my company. So can I use this SAN cluster for the next 10, 15, 20 years? Is it fine that your company will accept that? No, right? We have to have something called as a end of life. For everything we are having, we must have something called as a EOL, or end of life. So what we have, team? So we have to depreciate the hardware, and we have to upgrade to a higher or newer hardware, right? But if you go to the cloud platform, that is not your concern, because it will be taken care by the cloud service provider. And the fifth is basically, again, one more advantage, team. We have something called as a savings on utilities cost. What do you mean by this, team? Now, if you go to the on-premises, the biggest problem you are having is that you have a massive, if you want to manage your infrastructure, you have a lot of maintenance cost, the cost of cooling, the cost of power supply, connectivity, all these additional expenses, and basically all the other utility costs can be reduced, because if you're not owning any infrastructure, you're just configuring it accordingly for a proper business continuity. Okay, let me give an example here, team. So if I go to this particular, storage here, okay, if I show you the comparison here, you can see that whenever you store something in this particular storage device, it will get your data copied to at least 3 data centers in 3 different locations. If you basically go to this one, it will replicate your data to only one data center. So how do you choose it? You can choose it based on what? Based on your BCDR requirements, right? Whether if you want to go for the first one or the last one, it's all based on the BCPD. You will not say that the higher the best or lower the worst. It's all based on the business. You have to choose the proper kind of things, right? And the next thing is that maintaining and managing the infrastructure and licensing and everything is very complex in on-premises. When you go to the cloud platform, that can be easily managed, and you are not having any expense predefined. You are only paying for what you're utilizing. Like for example, if you see my AWS account here, or maybe Azure account here, I am currently paying only for what I have utilized. That means what? I don't have any cost involved because I'm having an infrastructure there. I'm only paying for what I'm using. And generally when talking about, the TCO also can be reduced. So cloud can have is, one of, definitely yes, it may have. So Amazon and Azure, what they say is that in each availability zone, they are having one data center, but they may have more. That's all. They'll not guarantee that. It can be either one or more. That's it. That's the only thing they will tell you. Correct. But at the same time, team, there are many things which we have to keep in. When you go for a cloud platform, there is a lot of benefits you get. Like for example, see, if you go to the on-premises, you have a complete visibility. But if you go to the cloud platform, again, you have to depend on a cloud service provider. And basically, what happens if you go to the cloud platform? In fact, it is much more easier because they have a massive team where they will manage the infra properly to avoid the most of the downtimes, right? Like that. And how do I basically plan for a proper BCPDR? The first word I want to say is that, team, there is a word we have called as a architect for failure. Okay, architect for failure. So what is an architect for failure, team? What is architect for failure? This is a very common word which we are having called as architect for failure. Okay, so architect for failure means that, team, now whenever you are designing something, okay, whenever you're designing something, let's suppose that you're planning for a BCPDR or you're planning for your infrastructure, you have to expect the worst case scenarios. Okay, you have to always expect the worst case. So architecting for failure in the BCP context is basically talking about what you must be able to make sure that whatever happens, whatever failure happens, you must be able to withstand or recover from any kind of a failures or disruptions or any disasters. So how do you do that? You have to make sure there is a proper redundancy. What is a redundancy? Duplication. You can go for either multi-zone or multi-region deployments. Like for example, most of the scenarios, what we do is that we now go for multi-zone deployments. Let's suppose that this is the cloud service providers region. Okay, this is the cloud service providers region. Inside the region, let's suppose that we have a 2 availability zones. We will have definitely 3 for sure, but I'm saying an example. This is my region, and this is my availability zone number 1, and this is my availability zone number 2. So what I will do, instead of deploying all my servers in one availability zone, what I will do is that I will deploy one server in one availability zone and another server in another availability zone, and I'll configure something called as a load balancing there. So what happens, team? Even if one particular server goes down, you will be having a proper redundancy there, right? You can either go for a multi-zone deployment or multi-region deployment, or worst case, you can go for a multi-cloud deployment as well. Like for example, there is a less chance that your cloud service provider can completely go down. If you take the history of Amazon or Azure or the top providers, you will see that the whole provider has went down. Okay, the whole provider has went down for a very few minutes, but the thing is that these things which basically have gone down for a few minutes, it was very rare. Like, it was like less than 3 or 4, like, approximately 3 to 4 times in the whole, lifespan only they have gone through a whole downtime for everything in the cloud platform. But just in case if you are still worried about that, you can go for a multi-cloud as well. Okay, so like this, we have multiple options there. Also, we have to understand that, team, the rule number, the most important thing is that if you want to have a bcpdr plan as well, as I told you before, in security, if you go for bcpdr as well, automation is a key. Okay, automation plays a key role. Even though we have a manual steps involved in this and it cannot be avoided, sorry, there is a automation there. Because what happens, team, you must be like, for example, now that now we have a proper bcpdr planned. Okay, this is my primary site, this is my primary site, this is my DR site. Okay, so what happens, team? Now my primary site got a trouble. Something went wrong in my primary site. So what happens? If you don't have a proper alerting, or if you don't have a proper monitoring, or if you are not able to detect anomalies or failure or any performance issues, then how can you switch back to the DR site immediately? By the time you manually do it, or you by the time you manually identify it and basically switch, it could have done enough damage to your business, right? So there must be a proper automated monitoring, alerting, and everything for anomalies or performance issues or failures and all, right? It's more of a proactive kind of approach we must have. And always keep in mind, whatever bcpdr plans you're having, either in the cloud or on premises, you must test it properly. An untested plan can fail, so you must make sure that even your bcpdr planning as well, you must be doing a proper testing in the cloud as well. Let me give an example. See, you have a fire and safety architecture in your company, right? Whenever you work in an office, you have a proper fire and safety architecture, right? Why do they have mock drills and all? Because they want to make sure the process works effectively, right? Like the same way for bcpdr, it's a massive thing, because you must know, the people must be aware of their responsibilities, who is basically supposed to trigger the bcpdr process, who is supposed to ensure that it is properly executed, who has to trigger each activities. So everything is, there is a proper predefined approach we must have for all these things, right? That's it. So as I said before, team, we have to make sure we keep all these points in mind and make sure that in that way we have to architect for a failure. We have to make sure that and most important thing I forgot to tell you is that, team, employees training and awareness is very important. If your employees are not aware of the BCP and what is their role in executing it, what they have to do, it can be a challenge. In fact, I will give an example. Now, let's suppose that when you go to a cloud platform, does all the BCP come to your responsibility only, team? When you basically go to when talking about cloud, does all the business continuity planning issues or BC issues is basically with you only? No. What if the provider's data center goes down? What if there is issue in the provider side? That is their responsibility, right? So your employees must be aware of the cloud computing journey, and they must be aware of the responsibilities what they are having, who is each role is basically done by whom, and what is the importance of proper response, and all these things are very important for us to understand, right? Then we must make sure that if you are using a single provider, if you are Krish, I'm not going for a multi-cloud provider, I'm going for a single cloud scenario. If you are going for a single cloud scenario, you have to make sure that for that single cloud platform, you must make sure that you must plan accordingly with the proper services. Just to give you an example of how it can look like, for example, team, if you go to something called as a, okay, if I log into my AWS account here, I'm using AWS because that is something which I'm having handy logged in with me. You can go for any cloud platform, no problem. See this, team. if I'm going to my AWS account here, okay, if I go to a service called as Amazon S3, whatever you store in Amazon S3 standard, we by default replicate it to multiple storage locations. Like for example, I am uploading a file. Let's assume that I am uploading a file to Amazon. So what happens, team? Whenever I'm uploading a file to, whenever I'm uploading a file to, uh, you know, this particular storage, by default they are replicating it to what? They are replicating it to multiple data centers or multiple availability zones in the same region, right? But at the same time, if you're deploying something called as a EBS volume or Azure blob, Azure managed disk, they are specifically stored in one particular data center. So you have to understand what is the resiliency level, or what is the redundancy level or resiliency level provided by the cloud service provider, and make sure you plan accordingly. So tell me, team, now whenever you store a volume, or whenever you store a volume storage in the cloud platform, by default, they will store it in only one data center, or maybe one availability zone. So how can we basically manage it? We have to make sure that we take regular snapshots. Like the same way, we have to make sure we have a proper plan for a business continuity. And just in case if the provider goes down, there must be a very smooth, graceful mechanism to make sure that we can migrate to a different provider. Okay, that's it. And to make it more clear, team, you must, for all these things to be successful, or for all these things to become successful, you must make sure that you must have a proper SLA or service level agreement. As a cloud professional, or as a C role member, or as a business leader, you have to always understand that there must be a proper service level agreement, which basically uh, you know clarifies all the things. What is the RPO, RTO? What is the escalation process? What is the point of contact? What is the failover capabilities? Everything we must be able to have a clarity when going for the cloud platform. Okay. Now, see, as I said before, when talking about the cloud platform, there are many factors we have. Okay. See, there are some specific words I want to clarify on this. When talking about cloud platform, these are the specific risks for BCPDR I want to explain. Okay. First of all, see, when you talk about the cloud platform, you know that in the cloud there is no capital expenditure, but we have a running cost. So if you don't know how to, like the question he was asking before, you are using the cloud either for a completely only for a disaster purpose, or if you are using the cloud for a primary purpose, whatever it is, you must be able to make sure that you must clearly manage the cost as well, because sometimes the costing can be even more worse than on premises. And when going for a cloud service, I'll tell you the biggest challenge we are having. Now you are going for a multi-cloud backup. That means what? Now this is your primary cloud service provider. Okay. And this is your DR side, this is your backup cloud service provider. So let's suppose that, what is the biggest challenge here, team? Let's suppose if you're using a SaaS service provided by this vendor, this can be a challenge here, right? Because what happens, it may not be supported by the other vendor. So we have to ensure that these CSPs you're choosing, or the cloud service provider you're choosing, is able to meet your requirements. They will be able to meet all your business requirements, manage your applications and all these things. So what happens, even if there is a disaster happens, they will still be able to continue operation with smoothly. That is why selecting a CSP is a very massive job. You have to have a very clear process for selecting CSPs and clarify your queries there. And always make sure for BC in the BCPDR factor as well, we must clarify in the SLA. Because what happens, team, now there is a downtime happens. Okay. And if the CSP don't assist you, or basically if there is no support from the CSP, if it's a CSP specific activity, then how can you basically have business continuity there? So you want to make sure that you must mention all your BCPDR requirements in the SLA and contract. And at the end of the day, we have to understand that when you go to a cloud platform, like the same way we have in on premises, in the cloud also is basically what is prone to, is also having a chance of failure. Like, at the cloud is not a supernatural thing. You know that the cloud is not a supernatural thing. At the end of the day, it's also the data center, right? So what happens if something goes wrong in the on premises? Like the same way it can happen in the cloud as well. So make sure that you plan for disaster recovery properly in the cloud as well. The fourth one is the biggest challenge we are having, because now you are going for a cloud platform. Team, this is something which I felt many times. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, team. So basically, what happens? Do you know in India, many companies use Azure more than AWS? The reason is because now it's changed, but still many companies was using Azure before, Azure more than AWS. For there are other reasons, but we'll discuss later. But the primary reason is that AWS was having only one region in India. You know the team. Now they have two regions, but previously they had only one region in India. Mumbai. That means what? Due to some reason, if the Mumbai region goes down, let's suppose due to some reason, let's suppose there is a massive flood or some kind of a natural disaster happened and the whole Mumbai goes down. In that case, how can you continue your business operation, team? Tell me. If you are a AWS, if you're only AWS customer, if you don't have any other available in any other regions in India, if the whole Mumbai goes down, how can you basically work there? It can be a challenge, right? That is the reason why Azure was having three regions in Mumbai. Azure is having three regions in. So what happens? They were having more demand at that time, but now that's the reason why AWS intentionally planned for one more region called as a Hyderabad. That means what? They have multiple regions now. Got the point? That is one very important point customers also look into when going for a cloud service provider. And before you basically go for any cloud service providers on this, you have to clarify regarding all these things, how much availability they are offering for each of the kind of data centers, what is the proper BCPD options we are having, how can we plan for a proper resiliency. Always keep this point in mind, team. Providing a proper resilient infrastructure, okay, providing a proper resilient infrastructure and providing a proper resilient service is the responsibility of the cloud service provider. But ensuring that you use it accordingly to make sure that you have a proper business continuity is your responsibility. Okay, that's a very important point. Now you say that your cloud service provider is having a proper resiliency there. They are having multiple regions, multiple availability zones, and all this kind of stuff. But even though they are having all these things, if they are not aware of or if they are not having something called as a proper, you know, uh, if you're not having a proper BCPDR plan you have done, or if you have not done a proper BCDR plan implemented, then obviously then there is no point of it. So BCDR of your infra is basically will come as your responsibility, right? That's it. And one more point we have to keep in mind, I'm not only talking about data, I'm talking about data as well as the functionality as well, okay, not only data. Okay, that's it. So either we can go for a scenario where we can have on-premises to cloud as BCD. That means what? Either we can go for a scenario where we can have an on-premise data center and backup as cloud, or we can go for a scenario where we can have a primary AWS as primary and AWS as backup, and we can basically go for a scenario where either AWS is primary and Azure is backup. Like this, we can go for multiple scenarios there. Okay, it's all up to us. Fine, team. So that's the key areas I wanted to just give you an overview on the business continuity in the cloud platform. Right. So when you go to the cloud platform, actually what happens is that the level of risk is basically getting increased. Means we can decrease up, but in a different side. But mostly in most of the cases, we are actually increasing. The reason is because, team. Now let's suppose that you're going to a cloud platform. Okay. So I'll give an example. See, you have something called as a cloud management console. See, the first challenge in the cloud is called as a cloud management plane, like AWS management console, Azure portal, or whatever it is, right? So you have something like that. So what is the problem there? Because you are going to the cloud platform and basically you have management console, you're able to access everything in the cloud platform through this management console, right? You're able to access everything in the cloud platform through this management console, right? So what happens? Due to some reason, if there is an attacker is able to compromise your management console, or if there is an attacker who is able to enter your access your cloud account using some means, obviously what happens? That means they get access to literally everything you have deployed, right? That is the reason why the management plane is called as a single point of failure. The cloud management plane is called a single point of failure. So to avoid these challenges or avoid multiple challenges in the cloud platform, you have to make sure there is a proper identity and access management strategy in the cloud platform. We must have a proper identity and access management strategy in the cloud platform, right? To start with, so when talking about identity and access management, team, we have three things we can discuss. One is basically we have a authentication, then we have a authorization, and then we have a accountability. We have a authentication, we have a authorization, we have a accountability. Now, what is authentication, team? Like for example, now you're going to a cloud platform. Okay, so let's suppose that you basically enter the username. Okay, you enter the username, like for example, ABC at abccompany.com, something. So I'm entering username. So once I enter the username, what I'm doing there, team, I'm claiming that I'm a particular user, right? I'm just entering my username and I'm claiming that I'm a particular user, right? And what I do, team, I will enter a password. So what happens? You must make sure that whenever you go to the cloud platform, you must have a very strong password policy. You must make sure that whenever you go to any cloud platform, we must have a very strong password policy. That's the first thing to keep in mind. Okay, either a critical account or non-critical account, whenever you say that you're going to the cloud platform, you must have a very strong password policy. So even if you have a strong password, or even if you have a secure password, does it make sense, team? No, because what happens, team, if you have only one particular factor of authentication like a password or pin number, etc., it's very easy to bypass it. So what we do, team, in the cloud platform, the next most important thing or the most mandatory thing is what we call as a MFA, or multi-factor authentication. This is a very important thing in the cloud platform. You must have something called as a MFA, or multi-factor authentication. So what is MFA, team? You want to make sure that you use more than one form of authentication. Like for example, you have a something, like your passwords, pin numbers, etc., something you are, that is your biometrics, and something you have. If you want to say as MFA, what happens, team, you must have any two of this, either something you know plus something you are, or something you are plus something you have, or something you know plus something you have. Like you must have a combination of at least two of this. Very important, team, when you go to the cloud platform, this must be enforced. If you don't have an MFA, the chance of compromising your account is really high, much more than any other things. If you see, almost every compromises happen in the companies, this is one major reason. Because what happens, team, multi-factor authentication is a major thing when you go to any cloud kind of organizations and any kind of a cloud services. And if you don't have this particular multi-factor authentication, this can be a major challenge for us. Okay, and how can we ensure this, team? How can we ensure this? We can make policies in the cloud platform. Now we can make policies for this. And what is the policies? That means that only if a person is logging in with the multi-factor authentication, he will be able to get certain permissions. But if a person is trying to log into a cloud platform without using a multi-factor authentication, what happens? He will not be able to access any resources. Like the same way, we can put policies there in with conditions like this to make the things more effective. See, what is the point I told you? If you want to have an effective governance, you must have policies, right? And for policy enforcement, we can use this cloud kind of things very much like this. Okay, that's the first thing we have to understand: authentication. And just to add with Steam, many people have a query that, so Krish, when you're talking about the word called as multi-factor authentication, is it completely secure? Or when you say you're having a MFA, does it mean that you're having a complete security there? No, I'm not saying that MFA is going to be a complete one-stop security for you, but having an MFA is much more better than having a single factor authentication. Okay, that's a very important point. Having a multi-factor authentication is a much better thing than having a single factor authentication. Okay, that's it. We have a AWS account here, and we have Azure account here. So what we can do, you can basically manage your identities in the on-premises. This is your on-premises data center where you have a Active Directory here. So what we can do, in the Active Directory you're having here, you will be able to manage your identities here. And whenever a person wants to log into AWS or Azure, they can be directed to your on-premises Active Directory like this. It is possible. Definitely yes. And in fact, now there is a lot of features coming up where you will be able to support authentication in between these two things as well. In future, it will be coming in a more precise way. So that's about the authentication. Okay, now authentication is what? Authentication is just confirming the access, right? Authentication is not about giving some permission to something. It's just about confirming the access, just to ensure that you get the proper level of access. That is only what we call as authentication. So confirming the identity, that's what we call as authentication, right? So a person want to log in, he just enter his credentials, and once the person enter the credentials, like maybe username or password or maybe whatever credentials he's having, that means the identity is verified. What is the next step? That is the step where we have to be even more careful about. That is authorization. What is authorization, team? It means that defining the proper level of access. Okay, when talking about authorization, we are talking about the defining the proper level of access. In fact, team, this is the one which we must be very clear about, that because there are many challenges we have in this. Because I have seen is that if you take the example I have worked with now, you have something called as a, mostly what we go for is that we have something called as a role-based access control. We have, even though we have different other types as well, most people go for something called as a RBAC, or role-based access control. It's a very good thing that you can basically assign specific policies to the person, or maybe a role in Azure, it's a role to the person, and what we can do, the person can get the proper level of permissions. But But after some time, when we keep on managing massive number of users, sometimes what happens, this get confused, and you may give accidentally more permission to users. Like for example, now there is a user who is part of a team. Let's suppose for some reason you are giving temporarily access to some other person or some other project. For the same person, you are giving access to some other project. Like this, what happens, team? You mix and match, and sometimes the person can get a lot of permission than what he is required. We call it as authorization creep or access creep. It can happen, right? So the goal of our authorization is to define the least privilege as possible. We have to make sure that a person has to make sure he get the least privilege as possible. That's the first most important thing we have to keep in mind. Okay. And how do we do that? In fact, if you take an example, so I will say that, let's suppose that we have a user called as John. I will say that for this user, he must only get access to Amazon S3, provided only to a specific bucket, provided only with a read-only access, provided he must be only accessing from the office IP address range, provided he must be only using or in between the timing from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. IST. Like this, I can specify the policies in a even more stringent way to make sure that the policies are specifically assigned to the user, and it basically, hits the proper goal. And we have to make sure that, team, we verify the access analyzer and make sure that when you go to AWS or Azure, we have mechanism to make sure that we can verify the level of user access, like just in case if there is any additional permission the user got, or if something went wrong, if there is someone who is having some more permission than he is required. Like this, there are many tools available in multiple cloud platforms to verify the access of users and to ensure the security. So authorization must be done in a proper way to ensure that there is a proper principle of least privilege. Very important. Okay, that's it. And finally, team, we have something called as accountability. What is an accountability, team? So when talking about the word called as accountability, it means that, see, if somebody asks you what is the primary reason for authentication, the answer is accountability. One major reason you have for the authentication is what we call as accountability. Like in what sense I'm saying that? Like for example, now there must be someone or something which is accountable for all the actions done. Like for example, something get created, deleted, modified, updated, doing something, you must have someone or something accountable for, some entity accountable for all those activities. So basically we can ensure this accountability by something held as a log file, so that we can have a proper log management or logging strategy for ensuring the accountability. In AWS we have a cloud trail, in Azure we have Azure logs, log analytics, and all these things are there. So you can use all these things for ensuring that there's a proper accountability there. And what happens if there's no accountability, team? If there is no accountability, it can lead to repudiation. That means what? A person can deny what he has done. Now, also, team, many people ask a question that, so, Krish, I am currently using AWS. So, how do I know that I find the security best practice for AWS for identity and access management? Or how do I go for, in Azure? I'm using Azure AD. How do I know that in Azure I'm having a proper security best practices? Uh, so, so the answer for that is, Steve, when you basically go for a cloud platform, the cloud service provider itself provides a proper document for the same. Okay, the cloud service provider provides many documents for the same. Like for example, if you see Azure, this is an example of Azure. Like this, they provide you all the proper best practice and checklist for identity and access management. The cloud service provider provide you with the proper checklist and best practices for securing your account. If you go to AWS, if you check for AWS IAM best practices, you can find best practices given by the cloud service provider. Like this, that can also always help you a lot. Okay, and if you want to have a more specific list of these things, we can go for something called the CIS benchmarks. In the CIS benchmarks, we have a section where we have a complete list of controls we have to keep in mind when talking about the AWS IAM or Azure IAM, etc. Okay, that's it. Make sense, team? So I just want to give you a set of best practices we can follow for the same. Like, what are the common best practices we can follow for the same? So when talking about the identity and access management, team, there are multiple best practices. First thing is that, team, I will tell you that, as I said before, we must make sure there is a proper, strong multi-factor authentication and strong password policy. This is a very important thing, team. It's very important that in every cloud platform you have to enforce multi-factor authentication. Most important that, and always make sure when talking about authorization, think about least privilege. A person must get the minimum, bare minimum permission for doing his job. And this third thing I have seen in many companies, which they don't follow, but which can lead to a massive disaster. I'll give an example. Now you go to let's suppose you go to an AWS account. Okay. So in your AWS account, whenever you create a AWS account, what you get is that you primarily get something called as a username, or we call it as a root user account, and you will get a password. So what happens, team? Whenever you create a AWS account, the primary user credentials you're getting is what we, or you're creating is what we call as a root user, or the primary user account. So normally what people do is that for a lot of activities, for a lot of operations, they use this root account. So what is the problem, team? If you use a root account for all the activities, the biggest challenge is that the root account don't have any specific level of permission limitations. They have the complete permission. The root accounts don't have a permission limitations, and they have the complete permissions by default. So what will happen if the root account if you regularly use it, and if the root account get compromised, there is a high chance that it can affect the business. So the best practice recommendation is that, team, whenever you create a AWS account, at the same time you make sure, team, you create a admin user inside it. Okay, in your AWS user account, you create an admin user profile inside it. So how do you do it? Very simple. I'm just giving an overview. So you go to your AWS identity and access management. If it's AWS, or in Azure, we can make someone a global administrator as well. And don't think, Krish, why are you not having MFA? It's because this is not my production account. This is just my learn training account. That's it. So you can basically create a user like this, and you can give him some specific permission like this to make him an administrator. So what happens, team? Whatever your day-to-day operations, whatever your regular activities can be done by the admin user, and not the root user. Don't use a root user for your day-to-day administration activities. So make sure you keep your root user account secure with someone with a proper MFA and all. Don't use a root account for your day-to-day activities. Use an admin account. Use an admin user profile for all the activities. And obviously, you team, like, even though all the accounts are very important, especially when talking about some specific accounts, like whenever you're talking about those accounts with some privileges, make sure that you continuously monitor those accounts for any anomalies. And that's the reason why now tools like guard duty, there's a tool called as AWS guard duty. Then we have Azure Sentinel. We have many tools like this can help us to provide this a proper security. And the next is very interesting. We have something called as a conditional access. What is a conditional access, team? Conditional access is basically different in different cloud, but I'll give you some example. So in AWS, how does it work? You can make sure that a user can only access some certain things only when he is using an office IP range, only when he is logging in between a particular time zone, only when he is using a proper multi-factor authentication, only when the user is basically using a proper browser, latest updated browser. Like the same way, you can put a lot of conditions for the proper access. That is basically what we call as a conditional access. And this is something where we will be able to figure out a lot of gaps. When you basically go to a cloud architecture, when you have a multiple number of users, continuously verifying the access and auditing the user access activities is basically most important. And if you want, you can basically find a lot of checklists on this in the internet, but this is mandatory. This must be done. So this is not something which you have to do every year. You have to do it maybe every month or every 2 months. It's up to your company. We have to plan it accordingly. And instead of creating multiple identities across the different applications or cloud platforms, use federation to have a centralized identity management. Okay, this is the common best practice we have in IAM. We have a lot more actually, but this is something which is generally I'm saying about the common security best practices for the identity and access management. You're going to a platform called as a eBay, let's suppose. So team, now we have something called as the eBay. It's a shopping site, right? It's a complete shopping site. We can basically purchase things. It's a shopping site, right? What we do, if you want to purchase something, what we do is that we click on sign in, right? And you can see that I'm able to sign in with Facebook, etc. Here. How is it possible for us to sign with Facebook? Federation. That means using my Facebook credentials, I can log into another vendor called as a eBay. I don't have to create a separate credentials here. That's an example. Like the same way, we can basically do what we have to create your identity in your on-premises and make sure that you're able to log in to multiple cloud accounts and other things using this. And we have a lot of protocols also, like we have something called as a SAML, OpenID, OAuth, SCAM. A lot of protocols are there. And if you want, you can basically add it here. Very simple. You can click on Add Provider, and you can configure federation here. The same is applicable for Azure. In Azure, it's very much more easier. Okay, would you suggest, what you suggest, how should we perform continuous? Definitely yes. See, continuous security posture is basically where we have to perform via tools, like, there are two ways we can do. Either we can basically perform that using the provide the native tools, like for example AWS provides something called as a CSPM tool, called as a cloud security posture management tool, called as a security hub. Or if you want to have a third party tool, okay, if you want to go for, there's a lot of third party tools out there. Prowler, then we have something called as a scout suite. Lot of tools are there in the market for basically performing third party or third party tools are there also. You can use any tools like this for performing a proper security assessment. AWS audit manager, lot of tools are there. These tools can be used for regular security assessment. Actually, it must be done actually, because if you see in my, I'm not able to show you the report because it contains some sensitive information. But like for example, for my clients, what happens is that I'm regularly getting proper updates from my clients. That means what, there is a specific set of tools which is giving me proper updates on their security posture. So what these tools will do, I don't have to do it manually. These tools will automatically perform the security checks and all the assessment regularly in the cloud platforms. And what they do, the report I will get in my email automatically. And if something is wrong, I'll be able to inform them and basically fix it as soon as possible, like that. With all the security measures we have, still we are having security breaches. Yes. See, first thing is that the the reason why we are thinking about this is because we think security is a one time investment. So Krish, I have put all the guardrails, I have put all the controls there, then why do I worry about the security, security breaches? The first thing is that security is not a one day process, it's not a single day process, it's a continuous process. That means it will keep on, you have to regularly work on it. Then you see, otherwise then why do we have to have a security team in the company? We must have a person or a team who come to our company and make a security poster and go for it, go, he can leave the company, right? Why we have a why the companies have to invest a massive money to pay a massive amount of salary to the employees? The reason is because security is a continuous process, and the breaches can happen for many reasons. Maybe new vulnerabilities in the applications or tools we are having, figuring out new loopholes, zero day vulnerabilities, then negligence, very common negligence, lack of due diligence, like this. Lot of reasons are there which can basically cause these attacks. Now you are saying that if you, it's like for example, let's suppose you want to avoid all these things, what you will do, you will put all the security controls. Let's suppose we put all security controls possible, all the security controls in the world we'll put in our cloud account. So what will happen, you will have only security, you cannot use the cloud platform for any other purposes. So we want to make sure that we have a proper security, we have a proper usability, and everything must be there, right? So we will use put security controls, and we will keep on verifying it to ensure that if we have missed something, if we have some gaps figured out, like that. And that is the reason why whenever there is a security incident happen, now that's a very important question you have asked. Now let's suppose we have a security incident happened. So what you will do, you have an incident response, right? Okay, you have an incident response, right? As a part of incident response, do you know that we do something called as a RCA? As a part of incident response, we do something called as a RCA, or root cause analysis. So what happens? Root cause analysis is basically where we identify the root cause and basically try to mitigate the reason. So what happens? It won't happen again. Continuously, our account will be more and more secure. That's it. Can you basically compromise Microsoft? Compromise the cloud infra of Microsoft.com, like the way, like that much easy in the way that you're configuring a basic small company? No, right? Because they have more team members, they are trying to scavenge more and more, figure out, and all, right? That's it. I'll give an example. Now, whether your application is in cloud or on premises, it is an application, right? So you have an application hosted in your cloud or on premises, it's an application. So whatever vulnerabilities you can expect in your on premises, you expect in the cloud as well. Like for example, now if you go to something called as a OWASP top 10, let me show you an example here. OWASP top 10. See, you have a OWASP top 10 for what? For application risk. So the same is applicable for applications you're hosting in the cloud as well. So what happens? These things are applicable for cloud as well. But what happens? In the cloud, we have even more risk. That means we have a multi-tenancy. we have something called as a lack of control. Like if you go to IaaS cloud platform, you have more control. You know what you want to do. You have a complete option for installing things. But if you go for a PaaS platform, what happens? In the PaaS platform, you are depending on the cloud service provider. You have to completely blindly depend on the cloud service provider. In the SaaS, you're just a viewer there, right? So what happens? You're increasing the risk, right? So what I'm saying is that when talking about the word called as cloud application security, I'm not saying that cloud application is something which is supernatural. The same thing only, but again, it makes the things even more complicated. There's a lot of benefits for going to cloud for sure. It makes a lot of things easier. At the same time, it also brings a lot of challenges. Okay. First of all, we have a word called as a security. So I just want to give you some examples here. So security by design. So how does it basic? This is not something specific to cloud. Okay, I'm talking about on-premises. When talking about security by design, what do you mean by that? The biggest problem that people now do is that, let's suppose that you're developing an application. Team, we have something called as SDLC, right? In every company, we have a SDLC, right? Software development lifecycle. You follow agile, you follow waterfall model, V model, spiral model. You have SDLC. So my question is that when you basically go for something called as SDLC, what is the primary focus of SDLC? What is the outcome you're expecting from SDLC? Get the proper application as per the customer requirements, right? Got the point? So what we do is that get the proper application or get the proper thing as you're expecting, nothing more, right? But the problem is that when you focus only on the application performance or application features and capabilities, at the end of the day, you will get the application there, but it will always make you in trouble in a different way. Think about this, team. If you basically identify and avoid and fix the vulnerabilities while you're developing or designing or testing the application, is it better, or after you deploy the application to production, then there is a security issue, you will fix it, which is more easy and more less impactful? You fix it in the earlier stages, right? You want to make sure that you fix, or you identify and fix all the kind of vulnerabilities and all the threats you're identifying from the point you're designing, you're developing, you're testing the application itself. So what happens? You can make sure that security is basically there in every phase you have basically worked. So what happens? The application which is delivered to the customer is by default secure. So what happens? The chance of security is just again very less. Application performance will be always optimal. It can always, the less chance of compromise. Like this, there's a lot of benefits we'll get, right? So security is not something which you have to add after the application is developed. Security is something which we have to follow in every step while developing. We have to follow security best practices. We have to test our code using SaaS tools. We have to test our application using DAS tools. We have to perform a VAPT. Like this, we have to have all the security activities there. Threat modeling, everything must be there as a part of the proper scenario. Then understand that when you basically go for a cloud platform, or when you go for a company, the biggest challenge we are having is that most people think that security is a responsibility of only one person. So understand that every person involved in that project is having their own responsibility in security. Okay, every person who is basically there is basically responsible for security. That means what? If there is anyone who basically miss it, or if there is anyone who make a mistake, or if there is negligence happens, what happens? It can affect the whole application, right? Then security must be something where the business have to understand that, because it's not something where only your developers has to understand. Security is something which is basically make sure that you understand, the company must be aware of that, and your stakeholders and everyone is basically aware of that. That's a key point. If you want to talk about the key challenges to this, I want to have some things. The first thing is that now you go for a cloud platform. Okay. What we do think is that, okay, Krish, my application is developed in the on-premises and basically it's going to the cloud platform. Either if it's an on-premise or cloud platform, I'm having an application security, right? No. When you go to the cloud platform, the security posture is changing. In the cloud, we have a lot of new threats, and in the cloud we have a confusion that who is responsible for what activities. So in the cloud platform, we must be able to identify that exactly who is exactly responsible for what activities in the application. Like if you go to a IaaS cloud platform, you are 100% responsible for the OS security, platform security, application security, and all. If you go for a PaaS, Application security is always your responsibility, like that. Then when you talk about what is migration challenges team, I'll give a most common example of a migration challenge. Let's assume that you are having an application. Okay, you're having an application designed in the or working in a company for a quite long time. Okay, you have an application which is basically there in a company for quite a long time. So when you're having an application in your company for quite a long time, the problem is that this application we are having, okay, this application we are having is designed, developed, and working only for the whom, only for the on premises, or on only for the on premises architecture. But when this application you're taking to the cloud platform, that applications are not tested or developed or you or designed with cloud in mind. They are designed with on premises in mind, right? So what happens? Obviously it can lead to a lot of migration challenges, right? The third thing is that we have something called as an inadequate support from management. What is the inadequate support from management team? Now let's suppose that you go to a cloud platform. Okay. Now, if your business, or if you're not able to convince your senior management, or if you're not able to convince your stakeholders, then how can you basically get the approval, the funding, the proper support from them? Krish, that is something which I will take care. Who will give you money for that? Who will give you complete business support for that? Business. So you have to make sure, you must be able to convince your management and you make them understand the proper security challenges you are facing when having an application in the cloud platform. And basically it's, it's completely based on the business culture, like how the business is planning, how serious the business is considering about the security and all. The next is very important: staffing. Staffing means that, now let's suppose that we have a person who is an expert in managing the on premises, but when we go to the cloud platform, if those developers or if those people or anyone, okay, if they are not aware of the cloud platform, then what it can happen? Like for example, I'm a developer. Let's assume that I'm a developer. If I'm a developer, what happens? As a developer, I know PHP, I know Java, I don't know .NET, I know all these programming languages. At the end of the day, if I don't know cloud computing when I'm deploying the application in the cloud platform, then how can I design the application for cloud? So having proper expertise for the staffing and training your staff for all these things are very important, because the company has to invest money and effort on making sure that your employees are up to date with the latest security best practices, cloud security challenges, mitigation techniques and all, right? Then, like, as I said before, many companies still are following something called as SDLC. They are not going for a secure SDLC. Most companies are now always thinking about, say, SDLC and DevOps. It's only time that they have to think about secure SDLC and DevSecOps and all, because what happens, they have to make sure that there is a proper architecture there. Then we have something called a budget constraint. What is a budget constraints team? Like for example, now when you say that you're going for a security control, it's not something we are expecting, like the same we are expecting, without knowing the scope of what you're doing and how much costing it will be as a whole. If you basically start deploying things in the cloud platform, it can be a challenge, because in cloud platform, sometimes certain tools can be even more costly and even more challenging compared to the on premises. Like this, we have a lot of challenges. Like, I can give you one specific challenge. Now if you go to a PaaS platform, is it possible for you to have your own security tool there, team? I'm hosting my application in the PaaS platform, in a PaaS service, like maybe Azure App Service or AWS, Elastic Beanstalk, etc. Is it possible for the customer to install an application or install a security tool there as a part of it? No, right? That means we have a limitations in the things, right? Like this. Now things that, see, the cloud, the CSA has done is that, team, the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, what they have done is that they have designed, they like, every year or every 2 years, etc., what they do is that they list the top threats in cloud computing. Like, the CSA will make a proper list of top threats they have in cloud computing, and the latest one we have is basically what we call as a pandemic 11. Like, for it's basically released on 2022. So what they have done is that, till 2022, whatever vulnerabilities they have figured out, what the CSP has basically, the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, has basically made a document which contains the top 11 vulnerabilities, which is basically there in the cloud platform. Okay. And if you see that whatever we have discussed is basically here. First of all, what we have, team? First of all, we have something called as insufficient identity credential access management. As you all know that when you basically go to a cloud platform, you're accessing the cloud and via as a public thing, right? And what happens if the credentials are compromised? The whole cloud is compromised. So what happens? Having a proper identity and access management can be critical, very important, right? Okay, so what happens, team, when you basically go to the cloud platform? The first thing is, the first security issue is what we call as a insufficient identity credential and access and key management. That means that, okay, you have to make sure you use the proper tools, policies, and other mechanism to make sure that your business can continuously and properly manage the identities in the business. Like for example, now you are storing data and all, right? So whatever it is, if there is no proper identity and access management, or if there is no proper due diligence for all these things, it can be a challenge. So the next thing is that we have something called as a insecure APIs. What is an insecure API, team? When talking about the word called as an API, I just want to talk about APIs a bit now. Then I will basically come to this insecure APIs. So if you see here, API means what? We can give a definition of API. It's a set of rules and protocols for application to communicate. Let me give you a simple example here. Now you are developing a website. Okay, you're developing a website. Okay, so in this website, let's suppose that you want to have an option where you can include map and navigation. In this website, you want to include map and navigation option. Yes, we'll go for something called as a Google Maps. We'll go for something called as a Google Maps. So what happens, team? We will contact Google and we'll basically use a Google Maps API. API is just a kind of a connector. What happens? It's a very small piece of code. So once I put the Google Map API here and authenticate it properly, what happens? Whenever I open the website, I'll be able to use the Google Maps. In fact, I want to give you a best example of it. You know this Uber application, like Uber. So what happens? So Uber is a company, they are clear about their business. So what they're saying, they are very clear about their business vision and mission. Okay. They are very clear about their mission and vision. So what they're doing there? So they are completely focusing on their business goals. They don't spend more time on effort or money on their application. They are focusing on their business. So what they have done for map and navigation, instead of developing it by themselves, they have already integrated the Uber application with the Google Maps, right? Like that. So what is an API, team? So API is something which can basically bring you functionality. Let me give an example. You go to a cloud platform. Okay, you go to a cloud platform, and in the cloud platform, what you do is that you simply click on something. You want to create something, delete something, modify something. You click on something. So what happens there? At that time, there is an API call which is going to the orchestration layer and which will basically do it in the underlying infrastructure, right? So in the cloud, everything is API. Okay, whatever you do in the cloud platform, it's an API call. Whether if you delete something, create something, modify something, update something, whatever you're doing in the cloud platform is called as an API call. So what happens? API is the key of cloud computing. See, if you basically get an example of APIs here, see this. So you can see that, let's suppose that we have a person who is basically going to a hotel. Okay, we have a person who is going to a hotel, and this person is now like he have a menu card. This person get a menu card. The menu card is basically the list of things what they can provide, right? So what happens? Based on the menu, the customer is ordering it to a waiter, and what the waiter will do? Waiter will basically go to the kitchen and get the food ready and give it to the customer, right? So the menu card is the list of APIs, list of available food items. There is a list of services. The waiter is the API. The kitchen is the infrastructure of the cloud service provider. So what happens? Whenever you're doing something in the cloud platform, you are making an API call there. So that means if you go for an API which is insecure, like for example, let's suppose if you are basically getting an API from a company, and if it's the API is insecure, what will happen, team? Tell me. It can lead to insecure applications, right? So API security is a very important thing which we have to keep in mind. In fact, that is one major reason why many compromises happen in the cloud platform as well. Insecure APIs. The next thing is that we have something called as what? We have something called as a misconfiguration. Okay, misconfiguration and inadequate change control. See, what is a misconfiguration? This is something not which happens only in the on-premises. This happens in the cloud as well, right? What happens? So if a person is doing something due to negligence or due to a vulnerability, due to an unintended damage, or something happens, due to that, if something wrong happens, what happens? That's a misconfig. Like for example, you forget to change the password, you forget to enable something, you forget to follow up proper best practice. So misconfiguration is also a very important challenge in the cloud platform. That is a third most important security challenge in the cloud platform. Like it can be for containers, it can be for serverless computing, it can be for IaaS, PaaS, SaaS services, and anything. This is a very common scenario which can happen, and this misconfiguration is what utilized by the attackers. Okay, misconfiguration. Then we have what team. After see in the misconfiguration, how do I basically prevent it? By having a proper checklist, by having a proper auditing there. All these things are very important for preventing the misconfigurations. Then lack of cloud security architecture and strategy. What is lack of cloud security architecture and strategy team? Now, when a business is going to the cloud platform, they have to make sure that they must have a very clear understanding of how to choose a proper cloud service provider. Like for example, they have to compare the various cloud service providers and design the solution accordingly based on the cloud service provider. And what happens if they don't know how to select a proper cloud service provider or the proper security controls there? It can lead to a challenge there. Got it? Then insecure, that is the thing which we have discussed now, insecure software development. So if the company is, if the cloud service consumer is following insecure security or if they are not following proper security best practices for application development, that's a challenge, right? That's an insecure software development. That's a very common challenge we are having. Then unsecure third party, like for example, now team, do you remember that a few minutes back I told you that we have some tools called as Scout Suite and Prowler, etc. We have some third party tools there for securing a cloud account. When you're using third party tools in your cloud account, if that tools you're using is not trusted and properly evaluated, that can again lead to massively high vulnerabilities. So you have to make sure that whatever tools you're using, the tools must be having a proper you must validate the tools properly, because it can be APIs or it can be any third party softwares or applications or anything. It can be a challenge for us. In fact, if you want to basically give an example here, let's suppose that now you're using a third party, like I'll give an, I don't want to say the name of the tool actually for the reason. Let's suppose that in Amazon we have a storage called as S3. Have you heard of it, team? In Amazon we have a storage called as S3. If you Google it, you will find a lot of softwares which can help you to connect to S3. Like you can find a lot of tools in the on the internet which can help you to basically connect your Amazon S3 buckets and basically help them to manage it properly. But what is the problem, team? Out of those tools available in the market, except a very few tools, all other things are can be easily compromised. Obvious, right? That's it. Then we have something called as a system. What is a system vulnerabilities, team? I'll give an example. Now, this is a very common thing. Either if you go to cloud or on-premise, especially in the cloud, it's more important, because what happens? You are having an application there, or you're having a service in the cloud platform. What if you regularly don't patch things, team? What if you don't regularly patch your infrastructure? It can lead to critical vulnerabilities, right? Or what if there's a zero-day vulnerability exists? What if there is a weak credentials? Like this, there can be many challenges, which is basically it can lead to compromises. The next thing is that we have something called as an accidental cloud data disclosure. That means what? See, as I said before, if you Google something like what Amazon S3 compromises, just an example. Okay, let me see if I can show you something. If you basically Google it, you can basically find that you can have a lot of attacks, like for ransomware attacks, for many reasons. You can you can find many Google. See, if I Google, you can find you can see there is a lot of websites saying that, see, hackers attacking misconfigured S3 buckets, poorly configured S3 buckets, hijacking S3 buckets. See, you will find something called as a you will find something called as a ransomware attacks. Like this, you will find a lot of things, right? How does it happen? The reason is because the major reason why for this compromise is because of this accidental cloud data disclosure. Because now what you do is that you try to secure things properly, but due to a negligence or due to some reason, if you fail to protect certain areas, or if you basically uh, don't properly configure things, either it's a mistake of the cloud service provider or if it's a mistake of the cloud service consumer, it can lead to massive data compromises. And it happened many times every year, every month. It's happening for many providers, right? That's it. And if you want to know, Krish, can you give some example for this? If you go to that document called as top threats in cloud computing, you will see the examples as well. They will tell you some examples which happened in every year till 2022. Then we have something called as a misconfiguration and exploitation of servers. So basically now, everybody is saying the word serverless and containers. Like if you basically go to cloud or on-premise, or especially in the cloud, you see the word containers a lot. Now you have a word called a serverless infrastructure as a code. Like people think, Krish, it's more secure, it's more easy, more lightweight. I agree with all these things. Even though it's more easy or more lightweight or more secure, the major challenges are there when talking about serverless and containers. Because what happens, let's suppose you have a container hosted. Even though it don't have an attack surface exactly like the normal servers and all, or more normal VMs and all, containers are also prone to many attacks. Like serverless is basically there can have a chance like this. So like the same way, when you go for a serverless or containers, we must make as a CSP, and the consumers have to make sure that there's a proper mechanism to mitigate or manage these attacks. Then the next is basically, generic, that is organized crime. That means what? Attackers targeting a company, or maybe attackers targeting a cloud service provider, is what we call as a organized crime and advanced persistent threat. And last one is basically what we call as a cloud data exploitation. What is cloud data exploitation, team? It means that now you are basically having a data there. So basically what happens, if there is attacker who is able to enter your infrastructure and somehow he is able to take out your data, that's what we call as a cloud data exfiltration. It can be because of phishing, it can be because of some kind of malicious plugins you have installed, anything, right? That is the reason why, team, if you go to the cloud platform, regular assessments are very important. Because when going to a cloud, normally people think that we must have a proper security there. But again, the problem is that we must always make sure there is a proper regular security assessment auditing to ensure that these things are properly identified and properly mitigated. Because see, we cannot complete, like you said, we cannot completely mitigate all the security threats or everything. What we have to do, we have to keep on identifying new and new threats, and we have to make sure that that is something which is properly identified and properly mitigated, to make sure that our infra is becoming more and more secure. So the last topic which I want to discuss today is the team. It's a very small topic. I want to discuss about something called as a legal risk. Okay. Now, when you go to a cloud platform, the cloud brings you a lot of benefits. Okay, cloud is something which can bring you a lot of benefits. At the same time, the cloud can bring you a lot of benefits. It can also create a lot of legal challenges. The first thing is something which we call as a conflicting legal. What is a conflicting legal requirements, team? It means that now you go to a cloud platform. Okay, so the cloud platform is basically where it's a global offering where it can be accessible for anywhere in the world. When you're storing some sensitive data there, what is the problem there, team? When you're storing the sensitive data there, just in case if this sensitive data is accessible by someone or copied to somewhere which is not in a proper properly authorized or not within the proper law, what happens, team? It can lead to a lot of consequences. And at the end of the day, you have a shared responsibility model. Always keep in mind, team, whatever happens, you are accountable for any breaches. Because what happens, even if you say you are going to the cloud platform, or even if you say you are basically going using the cloud for any activities, if something goes wrong, you are always accountable for and legally liable for data security and compliance. I repeat, you are always liable and legally responsible for data security and compliance. So that's I want to discuss, team. So team, make sure whenever you go to a cloud platform, this is something which is very important to understand. If you want to have a proper security in cloud computing, we have a lot of areas we have to look into. Like just I'm giving an example. Okay, if you talk about security of data, or when talking about security of the infrastructure, there are many things you have to keep in mind regarding. Okay, I'll give you some key areas we have to keep in mind. Like you must be able to understand the cloud security threat landscapes. You must be able to understand the concept of data protection and privacy. You must be able to understand the proper identity and access management. You must be able to understand the compliance and regulatory frameworks. You must know the concept of incident response in the cloud platform and cloud governance of the incident response. You must be aware of the cloud security architecture, employee training, third party risk management. So all these things are something where we must be aware of these things. So as a cloud professional, what you have to do is that you have to make sure you in your company you develop proper frameworks or proper optimal mechanisms to make sure that we have proper security controls to make sure these things are properly identified, and day by day we increase our security posture. That's it. Okay. And there are many documents can help us for those. You like you can go for the documents like the CSA guidance manual. There's a document called as a CSA guidance manual. Then you can go for something called as a then you can go for something called as a uh, the CCM document, the cloud control metrics document. You can go for something called as a CIS benchmarks. You can go for the NIST checklist. You can go for the ISO documents like this. There's a lot of things are available on the internet, and basically you can a lot of things are available which can help you to develop a proper cloud security posture. All we have to do is the team, we make sure we select all these things properly and we plan it accordingly. Okay, how to decide which C framework? Okay, that is based on the requirement. I'll give an example. Now you're saying that, okay, I'll give an example. Like we have something called CCM. What is a CCM? Cloud control metrics. Okay, cloud control metrics. It means that now let's suppose your company is currently in the on-premises. Okay, you are a company where you have an on-premise data center. So what we do, we are following the things like ISO 27001. We are following the SOC. We are following a lot of things like this. FedRAMP. We have following a lot of things like this for a quite long time. When you basically move it to the cloud platform, when you basically move your existing infra to the cloud platform, do you think this exact framework will be supported there? Like for let's take an example of ISO. If you basically have an ISO framework or ISO 10001 certification, when you go to the cloud platform, does ISO address all the concerns of the cloud as well? This is not designed for the cloud, right? This is designed for the on-premises, right? That means when you go to the cloud platform, do you think that ISO is able to this particular standard is able to address all your risk in the cloud as well? No. So you will have something called as a gap. So what we do, we can go for a CCM document, the cloud control metrics document. They will tell you what is a gap there, and you will be able to specifically fill the gap like this. For each purposes, like if you want to have an understanding of how to implement things properly, you can go for a guidance manual. If you want to verify what to do, go for a CCM document. If you want to do it specifically for a cloud service providers, go for CIS benchmarks like that. This is just for best practice, but again I said before, this is just for a best practice. This will always change. Okay, as per your business you have to customize. See, you have to go to the website, and what we have to do is that just select your cloud platform. Like for example, if you're using Amazon Web Service, click on Amazon Web Services. If you go to Azure, go for Azure. So select the proper cloud using. Like if I'm going for cloud, I click on cloud providers. See, I will go for Microsoft Azure example. So what happens if you click on this, you will be able to download this. Okay, that's it. This is a really good tool for having a proper baseline checklist for all the things you're doing. You can find even more things for sure. This is a baseline checklist we can have for it. Okay, see, certifications are not, certifications are not something which is when you go to the cloud platform or maybe on-premise or something. Certifications is a very good thing for sure, but again, that is only one side of it. Okay, having this, making a skill is basically based on continuous reading, continuous practical applicability, and all. You have to make your skills properly developed on that. That's it. How to do a IR activity? Is it in cloud? No, I have made a separate video on that. Like, it will be available soon. Like, we have a separate video done for that, how to do an incident response in the cloud platform. I have made it specifically to AWS, but that will give you clarity, because definitely there's a difference in the cloud. The steps are similar, but again, how to do it is basically different. Okay, I have made a separate video on that. It will be available in the YouTube channel for sure. Okay, that's it. See, career is something which is completely easy, team. So just because you asked, I'm telling you, when talking about certifications or any of these things, always understand one point, that definitely that is very important for us when you go for AWS or Azure or CCSP or CISSP or anything. All these things are definitely can help, but we have to make sure that at the same time you're getting a certification as well. More than that, you have to get your skills in the right path, because you know how to think and what to think. That's a very important thing when you go for choosing your career in cloud security, right? And previously when you say cloud security, it was only one field, but now cloud security is a very wider thing, where you have a lot of specializations are there. You can even focus on certain areas and all, right? That's it. Any other questions about the training? Uh, Rajiv, that is basically, which trainings can we have for moving to manager role? See, definitely you have a lot of things like CISSP, CCSP, C-Risk, CISA, CISM, then CCAK, CCSK, Cloud Plus, a lot of things are there. But again, that is specifically I can suggest only based on the particular, you only if I know your more background and all. Like that, for that, I always recommend you can have a call with me. You can ping me and I will fix a time and we'll have a call. And based on that, we can discuss about that. That's better, I guess. Because if I simply say that, it won't work for you. Team, if you have any queries or if you want to talk to me on this, make sure, just make sure, team, you ping me on Telegram, or maybe you ping me on LinkedIn. And you can always, also you can ping me in Telegram as well. We'll fix a time and have a call. That's it. You can always talk to me on this. I'm happy to share what I know regarding a career or something. Instead of simply going for a lot of certifications, you can always think about, which is the best one for your requirements. Just let me know if there is any queries you're having. I'll be able to support you for that. Okay, that's it.